welcome to another episode of the Talk Show. Today, I'm joined by my very special guest, very special friend here, Gokor Ambaryan. Gokor, how are you doing today, man?
Good, brother. How are you?
I'm doing good, and we are gonna jump right into some news that happened over this weekend. Obviously, this is gonna be airing on Monday, but we're gonna be talking about a UFC fight that happened this past weekend. Gokor, first and foremost, before we even get into the fight, tell us a little bit about you, kind of what you do, your background for folks at home who maybe don't know who you are.
I'm obviously an MMA coach. I hold a black belt in three different martial arts. I've fought before in my prior life. I'm just kidding. So, uh,
Undefeated.
yeah. And then now I own a gym. I coach multiple fighters in the UFC. I also am the VP of Talent Relations for Tuff-N-Uff, which is a promotion live on UFC Fight Pass. So I have my fingers all the way like needed into this sport. This is all I do. This is all I've ever done. And so this interview is something, or this conversation, I guess, is something that we've both been meaning to have for a while. And I think um, I really enjoy a lot of the news and the reporting that you do. And I just wanted to kind of hop on and give you guys just a little bit of a different insight and a different outlook on some of these fights that are happening, because I think the people will actually really appreciate it, hearing it from a little bit of a different perspective as well.
I agree. I actually agree completely. I'm a journalist at the end of the day, and I never fought at all. That's not the sport that I actually was in. So I'm always just trying to learn and just see, what different things about this combat sports in general I can learn. And, growing up, you were the main guy that I learned a lot from because, you were still competing when we first got to know each
Yep.
other.
Yep.
Now you're involved with Tuff-N-Uff. You have your own gym. You're expanding and continuing to expand, and you're coaching UFC fighters. And that's kind of what we're talking about here because there was a big UFC fight that happened just hours ago at the time of recording in Qatar between Arman Tsarukyan and Dan Hooker. It was the main event of UFC Fight Night. I'll first just start off with like an overview question with you, Gokor, and then we can dissect it a little
Yep.
bit. Just tell me what stood out to you when you were watching this fight and what were you anticipating or looking for, just considering what you knew leading up to this fight.
So, like, the one thing that I was a little bit concerned for from like the Armand end, and I'll also start off by saying Armand's a friend of mine. I'm always going to be a little bit biased towards him just because we're friends. Um, was I didn't, you know, he had been scheduled to fight now in January, and then obviously he was the backup for the title fight earlier this year. But he hadn't fought in a very long time. I think they said the last fight he had was April of 24, or which was
Yep.
UFC 300, right?
Hmm.
So when you're at the more or less peak of your powers, taking a little bit of time off, and in this case, quite a bit of time off, a lot of times will kind of get you out of rhythm. They refer to it a lot as like ring rust. I don't know if ring rust is actually the proper term. It's more like a comfortability factor. You know what I mean? Um, so that was what I was more or less concerned about. Now, the one thing that ended up working out was Dan Hooker also hadn't fought in a very long time. So I think you had two guys in there that were, you know, roughly are out for similar periods of time, and they kind of nullified each other in that sense. But
Yeah.
anybody that knows fighting knows, like this was definitely Armand's fight to lose. Um, he is an incredible athlete. He's an incredible talent, and Dan Hooker's a tough test for anybody. A lot of normal people do MMA math, and MMA math never adds up. You know what I mean? Hooker, I think, just beat Gamrot. Gamrot was the last guy to beat Armand. Um, so it's actually a pretty formidable test. But I think right now, like, Armand's, in my opinion, the best lightweight in the world. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
I mean, he's showing it, right? Getting that second round submission win. I think the one thing that stood out to me the most in this fight was just how dominant Arman was on the ground against Dan. We know that that's like his bread and
Yeah,
butter
yeah,
wrestling, right? But it almost felt like Dan had nothing for Arman. There was one time where he tried to get him in a choke, but Arman just completely flipped his body. I don't know what the terminology is, but he
yeah.
made it look
So
so easy.
it's something pretty interesting that we're coming to find a lot with Australian fighters and New Zealand fighters that kind of group them together, because there's the influence of the jiu-jitsu practitioner or instructor Craig Jones. Uh, anybody that watches, the Australians and the New Zealand fighters in particular have gotten really good at scrambles, right? So I think Hooker's approach to that was, hey, look, I know I'm not going to be able to defend the takedown when he's on my hips.
Right.
The best bet is try to lock something up and create movement when we hit the floor. Um, it's very similar to what Volkanovski was trying to do with Islam initially. Um, Even JDM to an extent was trying to create these exchanges. But when you get guys that are that skilled and that talented, um, you're not gonna out scramble that guy. You know what I mean?
Right.
I don't see anybody out scrambling him right now. And I thought the most impressive part, honest to God, of that fight wasn't even the ground control because that was kind of expected. I thought Arman's striking looked phenomenal. You know, I thought his distance management, being the shorter guy, and not coming in, coming out, staying on the outside when he needed to, getting on the inside, landing a couple punches, but not getting clipped on the way out. I think he only got hit with a couple body kicks, which is what Hooker does. Um, I
I
thought,
think Hooker only landed one kick.
yeah, it was a masterful performance. It was
Yeah,
a masterful
he
performance.
he controlled it completely. That was like what the one hope that Hooker maybe had in that fight was to strike on his feet.
Yep.
I was gonna ask you though, do you think that there's like a conflict or like the styles between fighters in Australia, New Zealand, and the fighters in like the Caucasus? Do you think there's like a confliction between their styles and that's why we
Yes,
see,
most
yeah, the
definitely,
guys in the
right?
Caucasus win more?
Most definitely, for sure. I think when you get guys that are coming from the Caucasus, those guys are all bred to be super athlete in particular when it comes to the wrestling and grappling portion of it. The Australians and whatnot, they're more strikers. They're more distance-based strikers, right? I can give you an example of a bunch of them. JDM, distance striker. Volk's actually got really, really long arms for how short he is.
Mhm.
He's an in and out distance striker, and same thing here with Hooker, right? Adesanya, another guy from New Zealand, right? So they've got a very similar attribute set. They play a very similar game, very big into footwork and angles and whatnot. Um, but at the end of the day, man, like, and people may hate on this comment, but it's just the truth. You know, Wrestling and grappling in MMA is always king. It's just kind of like a time proven fact. Uh, the biggest, highest profile MMA fight of all time, Conor and Khabib.
Mhm.
Kind of the same thing, right? It's uh the footwork aspect and the stance switches and whatnot definitely created a lot of problems at one point for wrestlers. But just like anything else, if it's been seen one, two, three, four, five times, people start learning how to adapt and work around how to make things happen. And so, Arman is that rare breed right now where he can strike. He's got very effective striking. His background's actually in Taekwondo. It's not even in wrestling. This is where people like have a little bit of a misconception of him. He stays in a very bladed, wide stance and can keep you on the outside of kick range. And then as soon as you start getting into boxing range, he can change from boxing range into wrestling range immediately you know um it's a very unique blend, and this is why I think right now he's probably the best lightweight in the world. And I think, like, if he fights Taporia, I even have my money on Arman over Taporia. I don't think Taporia is going to be able to close the distance into boxing range the way he would necessarily want to. I mean, I'm not saying it's not going to be a hard fight. It'll definitely be a hard fight, but tactically, if it's approached correctly, I think Arman will beat Taporia, and I think Taporia knows that. That's why he's trying to um, avoid him at all costs, it seems like.
I was going to actually transition and talk about that, proposed a potential fight between Arman and Ilya, both guys coming from the Caucasus. Ilya, obviously, being Georgian, but also Spanish too. That's one of those fights that I think, generally speaking, Vegas and the average casual fan is going to side with Ilya. And you already have early like betting odds coming out at not plus, minus 400, which makes Ilya a heavy favorite. But I guess, I want you to just talk about that a little bit more to me. Just, for you, from your perspective, seeing Arman as the top lightweight in the world, what stands out for him in his game that's going to make him possibly beat Ilya? Is it the fact that what you said a little bit earlier, he's going to basically stop Ilya from having the range and the boxing that he would want earlier?
Yeah, I think there's a very specific type of fighter that can give Arman problems. You know what I mean? And this is again where I go into MMA math, and I guarantee you a lot of these odds makers are looking at common opponents, which is Charles Oliveira. Arman had a 3 round fight with Charles where, he clearly, in my eyes, won, but it was a competitive fight. And then Ilya goes out and starches Charles in 2 rounds, right? Um, I believe it was in 2 rounds, correct? Or was it in the first round? I don't remember.
I
Um,
don't, I think you're right.
um, so I think, betting odds are kind of based on that.
Mhm.
But again, MMA math doesn't add up. I brought up the Gamrot comparison, right? A guy like Gamrot who's gonna just push, 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 push wrestling, against a guy like Arman, who's also a wrestler, but muscular, thicker build, a lot of lactic acid buildup, that can give Arman problems even till this day. You know what I mean? Um, though I think now Arman being more seasoned, he'll deal with it differently. I think that style is, the type of style that he has lost to in the past.
Yeah.
Um, Taporia doesn't have that. You know what I mean? If Taporia was Marab, the fight would be a lot more competitive. If Ilya had Marab's build, and his gas tank for wrestling and whatnot, it would be a lot more competitive, in my opinion. But if we're really looking at it, if the fight ends quick, Ilya is probably going to win. If the fight goes to decision, Arman's probably going to win. If the fight hits the mat, Arman's probably going to win. So, you know, um, and I'm not knocking Ilya. Ilya is a great black belt in jiu-jitsu as well, but he just hasn't shown that so much in the UFC, and he really hasn't. He's had no need to. But in my opinion, like, you can be great at something or you can say you're great at something, but until you show me, I don't really know how great you are, right?
Do you think it falls in the
So
same line or the same idea of that ring rust idea, where let's say Ilya has that sort of asset or part to his game, but because he hasn't shown it in combat yet, when he fights an opponent where he has to, it might be a little bit more difficult.
I don't know if that's the case, brother. Because he's still fighting, right? So I'm sure he's still preparing for that. He fought Charles Oliveira. Oliveira is a great jiu-jitsu guy, different kind of grappler, but great jiu-jitsu guy. I'm sure he had to prepare for it. And he did. I think there was a couple of instances where it hit the mat, like Oliveira went for a leg lock or whatever, and he got out. He's obviously very good on the floor. Don't get me wrong. Um, but Oliveira's a longer build, gonna play a little bit more off of his back. Arman's short and stocky. He's gonna blanket you when he gets on top of you. Are you gonna be able to explode? And how long are you gonna be able to explode for? You may be able to do it for a round, 2 rounds, but having someone like that on top of you for 4 or 5 rounds, um, I think is just demoralizing. Look at Islam and JDM, you know,
Yeah.
like Islam just literally blanketed JDM the whole fight. Um,
And he moved up, right?
and he moved up, right? He was the smaller guy, but that skill set is a very unique blend, and I think that's why people were so intrigued about watching Arman and Islam fight again, right? Because their first fight, short notice, great fight,
Mhm.
but that's the kind of style that I think will challenge Arman. I don't think a guy that's going to be primarily a boxer. I mean, there's always a puncher's chance, and with Taporia, it's more than just a puncher's chance. He's got
Yeah.
very heavy hands, right? Um, but the ways to win are what I look at, and I think Arman right now is probably the best lightweight in the world. You know,
Yeah.
and I am also of the thought process that I don't think that fight ever actually happens. I think Taporia is not going to fight him.
Oh, you don't think Arman and Ilya would
I,
happen?
I don't think. I mean, look, if it's going to happen, it has to happen quick. But I don't think it happens. I
Because Arman
think
was mentioning
Ilya,
something about that happening maybe in January or him being ready to fight in January. I know it's a bit of a
I
turnaround after fighting,
I
not
hope
fighting for such a long time, but
I
still.
hope to God I'm wrong. But I think Ilya's probably going to fight Patty next. It's stylistically, it's the perfect fight for him. They've built a little bit of hype around Patty. Patty hasn't been talking about anything for a while. I have a feeling that's what's coming next. It may be Gaethje. There's been those talks happening as well. But Ilya will wreck both of those guys. The
Yeah.
only fights at 55, I think, that can give Ilya problems are Arman and Islam. Um, and they can give him problems, um, you know, in a very similar tactical way, I think. Islam is very long and has very good striking on the outside as well, kind of like I was mentioning earlier with Arman. And I think that blend of being able to kind of control the range, super far, medium range, close range, is the type that will give Ilya problems. I think a guy like Oliveira could have, in theory, done it as well, but Oliveira literally said, I'm going to go out there, stand in front of this guy and try to hit him. And that feeds right into what Ilya's good at.
So I guess with all that being considered and you thinking that Ilya Arman fight won't happen, who do you think in the stacked, lightweight division that the UFC has, who do you think would be the next best fight for Arman?
I mean, look, who do I think is going to be up there for him to fight, or who do I think is like another actual contender, are two different things, right?
Right. So you can
Um,
answer both.
I feel like it's probably going to be like uh, I think it's going to be either Patty or and Ilya or Gaethje and Ilya. Um, I think Arman is going to either wait around for a little bit, or is going to be a backup. So I really don't know how the landscape is, and this is something that I know what Sean Shelby thinks of Arman. I know what Sean Shelby thinks of Ilya, and he thinks very highly of both of them. Um, but MMA math is weird. MMA timing is really weird. You can be the best
Right.
fighter in the world in a certain division, and uh, the timing of you being champion may just pass you up. I have had friends of mine that were in these similar situations. Carl Friesen was a very, very good friend of mine. And for a long time, I think in the early 2000s, everybody thought Carl Friesen was the best welterweight in the world. Um, he was supposed to fight Matt Hughes for a title, tore his hamstring, never got the opportunity, and then never was able to get back to that opportunity. You know what I mean? So I hope I'm wrong. Um, and I think Arman's dominant enough to where he will fight for a title next year. I just don't know if it's going to be in January. As far as who I think is going to be a good challenge for him, people are going to think I'm crazy, but I'm really actually high on Saint Denis. I've always been really high on Benoit Saint Denis. Um, Again, another guy that's just got super heavy wrestling and will maul people. He just beat Dariush pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, lightweight's kind of weird right now. You got a lot of the old guard going away, and then um, the new guard seems to be a little bit more established now. But it's just between Islam leaving, Ilya winning, it's just kind of been a really weird deadlock in that division.
Yeah,
You
and
know?
I want to ask you because you have more insight and expertise on this entire situation, even stemming back to Arman's injury for his fight against Islam for the second fight at 311. Do you
Mhm.
think now Arman is like in good graces with the UFC and working his way towards getting that title shot, or do you think that was all
Yeah,
just kind of like social media buzz earlier on?
no, I think they had an actual gripe with him, honestly. And I know for a fact that they questioned the legitimacy of the injury. I know that for a fact. Um, but you know, people don't understand. I actually had one of my fighters that was supposed to be on this UFC Qatar card, Sergey Spivak. He was supposed to fight Shamil Gaziev, and I ended up not going because I had the birth of my child this week. But um, Sergey got to Qatar and got super, super sick to the point where he called me. He's like, Coach, I've lost like 13 pounds in 2 days.
Wow.
So we had to pull him. Obviously, I'm not. I called Ali Abdelaziz, who's his manager. I was like, this is the scenario. We have to. I don't think it's right for us to fight. And shit like this happens in MMA. People don't understand that, and everybody's really quick to create a narrative and talk crap and say this. But what people don't understand is getting to fight week is 2.5, sometimes 3 months of preparation. In 2.5, 3 months of preparation, your body gets so beat up, your immune system crashes. Yes, you're training yourself to be ready for that moment, um, but it doesn't always work out that way. You know what I mean? A lot of the reason why, like, I personally had to stop competing and fighting was I just can't make it through a training camp anymore. You know what I mean? Not that I don't want to. I still have the ambitions for it. I still, when I feel good, I feel great, but I don't feel great that often anymore, you know?
And it's very
Um,
taxing on the body. Some people,
very taxing.
right. It's a risk on your life.
Yeah. And, um, in Armand's situation, you could feel okay. And then as soon as you start cutting weight and you're losing, some of these guys are losing 15% of their body mass
Hmm.
within a span of 3 days. You know what I mean? That's
Yeah,
that's that's incredibly taxing.
that is
And
incredibly
until
taxing.
and until you do it, you don't know what that is. So I know for a fact the UFC was upset with him. Um, but also, this sport is unlike anything else. Shit happens and you can wake up feeling amazing one day and then the next day you just don't. It's a part of it. So
And a result
um,
like this, right, is something that would probably put Arman in the UFC's good graces to be considered
correct.
moving forward.
Correct. And I think the fact that he made weight as a backup, now he's made weight twice this year. I think that says a lot.
That does.
I
Now,
think that
I
says a
want
lot.
you to put your coaching cap on real quick for me. I just
Hmm.
thought of a question. And, watching the fight between Arman Tsarukyan and Dan Hooker, if there was something you would take away from that fight that you could possibly use as kind of a learning mechanism for, some of the students that you have, the younger ones or even the older ones, what would that be?
That's such a hard question to answer because, you know, my job, my job as a coach is to take what works, uh, and try to teach students. And what works for Armand may not work for someone that's got a longer body build or whatever, right? So, um, like I said, the one thing that he does incredibly well is that distance management. He's got great leg dexterity, and when he commits, he's committing. When he's on the outside, he's evasive and trying to kick away. And that's all IQ stuff. I'm not so big in believing in copying guys because I always say this to my students is like if you go out there and copy somebody, you're always going to be second best at it. You know what I mean? You want to take what people have to give you, even my students take what I have to give them and make it your own and try to progress upon it. That's the natural um learning curve or learning tree of the sport. If you look at MMA, let's just say when I was fighting, which crazy as this sounds is fucking 10 years ago now, right?
Already.
If
Wow.
you if you look at MMA when I was fighting versus what it's now, it's so much different. It's so much more advanced. If you look at MMA in 2005 and 2025, they don't even look like the same sport anymore. So it's always progression. Take the ideas, take the concepts, but try to build your own system around the concept is what I try to teach my students. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's
And
that's
it
that's the
shows
biggest
that
thing.
your system and everything that you do is working because before this episode wraps up, I do want to highlight just what you've been able to do, especially in the Vegas, MMA scene, and the fact that you have a major facility now that you have what hundreds of fighters probably coming in on any given day.
Yeah, I mean, look, I have a lot of people that come through the door that have trained with us. I have an MMA team now of probably like 50 some odd fighters that are mine, that not people that are like coming in and sparring or something, but they actually train with me. Um and the one thing that I do very different than a lot of the gyms in town, and COVID actually taught me this lesson more than anything else, was I've been building from the ground up, like I'm not really big into taking established fighters anymore, or ever, honestly. My whole shtick these days, uh, for the last 5 years, 7 years, or whatever, has been, um, I'm gonna build people to that situation. One of the proudest things that I can say I've done is I had a fighter of mine that I got as a one-on-one amateur all the way to the UFC. Now he's, I think, 6-1 in the UFC. That's huge, like, because um it shows we can do something. And the fighter development portion. And I have a lot of guys coming up right now that honestly, like, this next generation and this next wave of fighters is going to be so much better than even the last, because now I have established veterans UFC fighters in the room that are there to push them. It's not just me. That first wave of fighters, guess who was having to go and do a lot of their sparring rounds? Guess who was having to go in there and try to compete against them? It was me. And, they got good because of it. But now it's still me. Plus, I have top 5, top 10, top 15 ranked UFC fighters in the room that are pushing them and pushing that same agenda and thought process on them, which, you know, uh, thank God, I am where I am, and I'm not content. I want it all, I'm gonna come for more.
Just
So
knowing you and knowing the story and being able to tell your story, even back when I was in college, of you starting in a garage and then now expanding to a new location, and then now fast forward even more years, you got UFC fighters, you got managers, you got fighters from all over the country, all over the world.
it's kind of crazy because you were
Mhm.
there, you saw the start, right? So the start was that little garage, and then you came to the first location. And my first location, my own first location, that was Freestyle MMA. The whole building or whole room from end to end was 1,500 square feet, with the sitting area, with the restrooms, with the desk and all that stuff. Now, knock on wood, I'm almost at 6,000. I got two full-size cages in the facility. I got showers, I got saunas, I got cold plunges. Um, you know, but again, this is just, I'm not content. I want more. I want to make it bigger. I want to make it better. I want to build more talent. Like I said, I've also become the VP of Tuff-N-Uff,
Yeah,
a VP of talent relations, I should say. So, like, my job is to scout the best fighters and bring them to us. Um, and I'm super, super proud of the work that we do there. I love what I do over there. There's huge talents, Eduardo Pena, Renato Canuto, David Magoyan. These are all mega, mega talents that I think one day you will be seeing in the UFC. Sal Everett, uh, so I I want it all. Like I said, I'm coming for it all, you
I
know.
love it. I love
Uh,
it. That's our
so
mentality when we're people who have sports backgrounds. If you're going to be competing in something, if you're going to be doing something, you better do it to its full extent and go all the
for
way.
sure, we have a saying in Armenian that says, "When you dance, you got to dance all the way."
Uh-huh.
Paras pri paras, right? So that's what we're trying to do.
That is amazing, man. I can't wait to have you back on the show again to talk more. Unfortunately, we only got 30 minutes and the 30 minutes are coming up, man. I really wish we could, talk more about, what you're doing in Vegas and some more, Armenian fighters coming up, but I'm sure we'll have a lot more time, to do that. Overall, though, this, Arman Sarukian win, definitely
Huge,
it's huge, and it's a good thing too for, Armenian fighters who are trying to break into, MMA and combat sports too.
for sure,
All right.
brother. And you're gonna see a lot of them soon.
Like David McGoyan, like you mentioned.
Yeah.
Thank you for, joining me on the episode of, the talk show. Thank you so much. And, one final note before we actually get going, man. Congratulations on, baby number two.
Thank you,
Congratulations
brother. Thank
on,
you so much.
extending the family. That's so awesome. And, major congratulations to you and the family.
Thank you, bro. Hope to see you soon.